just joined in, this is a Breakfast Live show here on TV Africa. My name is Lebene Abrokwa. It's time for Key Issues. A very big thank you going out to Awake Mineral Water, to Doxa Open University, to Kojo Shoes, and then of course to Candy Raymond. This morning on the Key Issues segment, let's have a conversation on climate justice. To help us talk more about this issue is Cedric Dzelu. He is Africa Youth Focal Person. Good to have you here, Cedric.
Thank you very much, Lebene.
Dzelu from Dzelu Kope.
Really so.
Right. So that does it mean Dzelu Kope belongs to you? Because I am a Voltarian and I don't understand why I don't own my hometown. But is Dzelu Kope for you?
It is not for me, but what I do know is that I come from the lineage where Togbi Dzelu the first, happens to be the leader or the overlord, who was opportune to have taken that particular town to a level where he was actually honored, in terms of naming the town after him. And I'm only privileged to come after him. And my very respected uncle is now the chief of Dzelu Kope. And I must confess that I hold that, sense of humility and pride at the same time to have come from that place, but it doesn't belong to me.
I see. Anyway, so you are from the royal background. Probably I should come around for some lands and all of that. But I also understand yesterday was your birthday. So let me take this moment to wish you a happy belated birthday. God bless you. May all your heartfelt desires come through for you. Climate justice, a very big one. But first of all, help us understand what climate change really is, even before we get into our main conversation for this morning.
We speak of climate change when we talk about the long-term variability in terms of changes in the weather pattern of a particular geographic area. So to put matters in simple words, for instance, in Ghana we know we have, dry season and rainy season. We know very much when it's supposed to rain and when it's not supposed to rain. So when there is a level of changes to the weather pattern to an extent that is not known to us, then those changes refer to climate change. And it has become a topical issue because of its impact. So for instance,
the impact. Let's take us through the impacts of
so the impact of those variability. For instance, let's take farmers for example. Farmers know when to plant and when not to plant, but because of the raining and the dry season. So basically when it's supposed to rain and the rains are coming more than supposed to come, or when it gets to dry season and it's prolonged dry season, for instance, it causes drought. And of course when it rains and the quantum of rainfall is even excessive, it leads to flood. And those floods, for instance, cause a lot of casualties, loss of lives, loss of properties. It also threatens economic progress and stuff, and even in terms of food security. Climate change also affects our human health. For instance, I make this example every time that I am doing a project at Adaraka. Anytime the rains gather, there are people there who are traumatized. Their mental health is questioned because they know that when it rains, just 2 hours of rainfall, will cause so much damage. It will be flooded, and that they have to move from their homes to different places.
Right, but whose fault is it actually? I mean, if you live in a flood-prone area, you know that definitely when it rains, it's going to get flooded, right? So probably you just have to live there.
I mean, right. So if you live in a flood-prone area, definitely if it rains, that place will be flooded and you'll be at a disadvantage. But when we speak of climate change, we are speaking of, in a very more complex issue. We're talking about the effect of the global warming that comes as a result of, the burning of fossil fuel. The divide between the global north and the global south. That, the global west, north has been able to develop through the burning of fossil fuel, the extent to which it has warmed the global atmosphere, and that has caused the climate to change, in general. So the melting of the glaciers, prolonged, drought, floods, tsunami, deep heat waves, all of these things cause so much, the extent to which the average person cannot be more or less be charged for doing that. It's come as a result of a more of a conglomerate sort of activity of burning fossil fuel. But yes, I agree that there are, little human or individual activity that could lessen the damage of climate change. And I'm happy that your studio has invited me to talk about big issue.
Are we experiencing climate change here in Ghana as it stands now? Because some days it gets sunny, very, very hot. Are we experiencing climate change here?
Evidence are all over around us. TV Africa is situated not far from Seko, not far from Kaneshi, not far from Dakuman, and I'm very sure that anytime it rains 2-3 hours, your men have to go, to interview people, who are facing issues of flooding. I'm sure that those of your media men up north have reported many times about drought, prolonged drought, and just last year we had, the tidal waves, from Keta, where people's houses, schools, were taken over.
But some of these things that you have mentioned is as a result of some of our actions. I mean, you talk about tidal waves. The issue with tidal wave is that it looks like people are winning the sand over there. You talk about flood and all of that. It's regards to our gutters being choked and all of that.
I mean, you're right when you talk about the fact that it is human activity that is essentially causing climate change, and that is where we refer to as the anthropogenic effect, of the causes. Yes, there's human activity. However, I must submit to you that those examples you've cited are the very, very minute, examples that one can set out. For instance, when we talk about tidal waves, it is beyond, people, building close to the seashore. We're talking about more bigger issues, for instance, of the melting of the glaciers. When the glaciers melt, it increases the level of, the sea waters. And when the sea waters rises, there are people who are living just at the, sea level, below the sea level. There are people who are living just at the sea level and above sea level. So if you are living, just at past sea level or below sea level, and then there's melting of the glaciers, and it increases, for instance, the level of water of the sea. Definitely, it doesn't matter, whether you build far from the sea or close to the sea will get to you. It will visit you. I agree that, yes, there are people who have built, along waterways. But you will notice that recently, many houses that are flooded are not around the waterways. The spillovers are just too much. When we talk about drought, for instance, human activities, the local human activities have little to talk about that. Drought is essentially about the warming of the global atmosphere that has caused climate change, that places up north and other areas could not experience rainfall for a very long time. So yes, I agree that human activity to some extent have caused climate change. But then the big issue remains, and that's a justice form of climate change, that it is as a result of the burning of fossil fuels, the extent to which the global north has developed extensively, has warmed the atmosphere, has affected all this and caused all this.
Let's look at climate justice. It brings us to our main conversation. Sure. What does it mean?
So, you can derive it simply from the word justice.
Okay.
So justice basically talks about issues about equity, about fairness, about impartiality, about transparency. Now, when you situate that in the context of climate change, and we refer to that as climate justice, we are talking about the procedures of providing or ensuring equity, fairness, impartiality, transparency in providing climate change solution. And this springs from the concept that, one, there's a paradox of the climate crisis, that those who have caused the problem the least, as the global south, African countries, Asian countries, they are suffering the most. It comes from the fact that people who do not have the capacity, because, for instance, we are affected differently. For instance, if you and I, affected by floods, for instance, and I saw you, driving to this facility with a very beautiful car, I must confess, I came here to, a public transport. If, for instance, our homes are flooded or flooded, for instance, the level at which you will react to the floods will be different from how I will react to the flood. Even if it is raining, you just enter your car, for instance, and then you drive away. I would have to find an umbrella, walk 30 minutes before I get a trotro. So the level of impact in itself is different. So climate justice talks about how do we ensure that will provide climate solution in the manner that speaks to fairness, equity, transparency in providing climate change solution. Today we are talking about just transition, that is moving from fossil fuel to green energy.
Okay.
You know, for instance, we talk about wind power, we're talking about solar. But there are people in Ghana that do not even have access to energy in the first place. So you are telling them to stop using charcoal. You are telling them to what they follow. They don't even have access to even the electricity in the first place. And you are talking about solar panel. Now, solar panel, just to install a solar panel by a small building, we're talking about 40,000 Ghana cedis. Yeah. And you are telling my brother, my sister, you know, in the village to buy a solar panel, that costs 40,000.
What is the alternative then?
The alternative is for government, for international corporations and development partners to look at the justice dimension of providing the solution.
Okay, so it brings us to this question. What are these dimensions and procedures that you have spoken about?
I mean, first of all, we're talking about the distribution of, you know, cost, distribution of support systems, so that, you know, when you are looking at providing, you know, climate change solutions in terms of packages about who benefit, you want to be sure that you are provided with a level of research mechanism that can be able to detail who gets what. For instance, during the COVID time, we saw the government, you know, rolling out certain projects in terms of providing basic necessities, you know, food and stuff. But sometimes, you know, people are provided with equal stuff. If we are affected differently, why should we be given the same sort of support? The support should be different also. So one, we're talking about the level of distribution of support systems, that it should be different and it should be unique to the circumstances of our various variability and our various impact level. Two, we're talking about financing. Look, when we talk about climate change, we're talking about two key issues: adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation talks about adjustment. How do we ensure that people are able to adjust to the level of impact of the climate crisis? And so when you are providing adaptation solution, you want to ensure that it is detailed and tailored to the individual specific needs of people.
Okay.
So for instance, if you are talking about adaptation up north, that will be different from adaptation, you know, down south or in the middle belt. It will be different from somebody who is on the coastal level. But it gets to a point where people must be moved from a whole community. It gets to the point when people's livelihood must change. So for instance, if you are changing people's livelihood because of, let's say, just transition, how do you ensure that the skill that people used to have in one space is compensated for in different space? And I'm happy talking to you, and I've watched you several times on the station. I have so much admiration for you. And one thing you should concern about yourself is the gender dimension of climate justice. Because when it says that women are disproportionately affected than men.
Why?
Yeah, why? Because first of all, if you listen to all the talks or read all the books about issues about the distribution of, you know, wealth and poverty in Africa, you will notice that, excuse my word, that men are more economically sound than women. And so if that is the case, for instance, when there's any shock, women suffer the most, women and children.
But there are women who are also changing the narrative now.
No, I mean, that is why I said, I mean, I apologize for the, I don't mean to negate
That's
women,
fine.
but what I mean is that, for instance, when you go to many places, when you look at climate change, the impact of climate change, it affects women more than the men.
Exactly.
For instance, let's take agriculture, for instance. It is said that more women are into agriculture than men.
Yeah.
So if there is prolonged drought, who suffers? And it's easy for men to sort for a change in their livelihood, a change in their economic activity. If I am married to you, for instance, and we have 3 children up north or anywhere in the country, and there is any impact of climate change, say flood, say drought, tidal waves, heat waves, it is easy for me to tell you that, hey, baby, I'm moving to Accra. I'm moving to Sunyani. Why? To do ABC. I leave the kids with you. So the vulnerability then falls back on you. It is hard for many women to migrate because of climate change. Because the economic, cultural, and social setup is at their disadvantage. So even if you look at climate justice, for instance, it speaks to the fact that how do we ensure that women who are disproportionately affected are compensated, are taken care of? And I agree with you fully when you say that there are women who are doing very well, or even in certain cases better than men. But the truth is that there are more women than men who suffer the most, and climate justice should attend to them.
Right. What are the four climate justice approaches?
So we're looking at one, the polluter pay principles.
Mm.
That speaks to the fact that one, if, like I said at the beginning, that the climate crisis is caused as a result of global warming.
Okay.
And when we say global warming, basically we're talking about pollution.
Mm.
And that brings us to the flaring, of greenhouse gases. That's what you see, coming out of the various factories, when they're producing a stuff. So the polluter pay principle, that if you are causing this damage, then you should be able to pay to address those damage. We're also talking about the beneficiary pay principle. That look, there are many countries, in the West who are benefiting from the excessive flaring of greenhouse gases.
Right.
It is not us in Africa. So they should be able to take up those responsibility of addressing the climate crisis.
Who is taking, the responsibility to check on all of this for us, especially here in Ghana?
So I will credit the advocate. I'll credit the activists, people like myself, who, are on the front line talking about these issues, raising their awareness, charging government, and putting pressure on individuals and corporations to, as a matter of fact, embrace their responsibilities in the fight. I would also want to credit the global architecture, in addressing the climate crisis. I'm talking about the United Nations, framework, on climate change. These are the global forces that are ensuring that the bigger issues of mitigation are being addressed at country level. And of course, I'll give credit to countries who have embraced the fact that, look, we ought to to progress or to develop in a sustainable manner. And
has Ghana approved that yet?
Yes, Ghana has made a very giant step towards this process, right from President Atameo's time to John Mahama, and then to President Akufo-Addo's comment, the various government to have taken various steps, in coming out with nationally determined contributions, frameworks, and then ensuring that they respond. I'm sure that you might have seen a lot of engagement from the Minister of Natural Resources on Green Ghana and stuff.
Yeah, we'll get into that conversation. But before that, let's take a breather here. We'll be right back. Please stick and stay. That's more. Many thanks for staying tuned. This morning on the Key Issues segment, we are touching on climate justice. And of course, my guest is Cedric Dzelu. He is Africa Youth Focal person. If you just joined in, let me try and read out what climate justice really means, even though my guest has touched on it. So climate justice is a concept that addresses the just division, fair sharing, and equitable distributions of burdens of climate change and its mitigation and responsibilities to deal with climate change. It has been described as encompassing a set of rights and obligations which corporations, individual, and governments have towards those vulnerable people who will be in a way significantly disproportionately affected by climate change. Cedric, before we went on the break, we were talking about some of the initiatives that Ghana has taken towards this. Let us in on some of them.
Yeah, so I was speaking to the fact that this government, for instance, has embraced, very greatly the concept of addressing climate change. And if you have followed the Minister of Natural Resources, he has come with a very, great project on Green Ghana, planting, of thousands of trees, because the tree serves as a, carbon sink that, so like more or less arrest, the carbon in the atmosphere. We have seen Ghana being part of a lot of treaties that embraces issues about, for instance, the carbon market and all the principles in terms of how do we mitigate and provide the adaptation strategies.
Is that enough?
Well, if you ask that question, you look at the evidence around us, and once the evidence around us, have not come to a stop, for instance, the flooding, the heat waves, the tidal waves, one cannot say this enough. But the results are in the long term. But what I can say is that we should take satisfaction in the fact that we as a country are making some steps as compared to other countries in addressing the crisis. But it is definitely not enough. And that's why people like us will continue to chance on such platforms to be able to, advocate and speak to these issues, whether we're in Ghana or out of the country, and any forum that we find ourselves in.
Right. You're part of Africa Youth Focal.
Sure.
What role do you play in this?
So basically, you're talking about the African Activist Climate Justice Program. So this is a project that is in 8 countries in Africa, funded by the Netherlands government, and happen to be the Africa Youth Focal.
Funded by the Netherlands
government.
Why is it not funded by, Africans?
Like I said at the beginning, I told you that the climate justice basically is about the divide between the global south and the global north. That it is those in the global north that have caused, most of these, challenges. And most of these countries, or I should say, some of these countries have embraced those responsibilities of providing the support system to us in the global south to address that. And Netherlands is one of the countries leading in that, mandate. So this project basically is in 8 countries, and what it's sought to do is to position Africa's narrative in addressing the crisis. That this narrative should not come from the West, it should come from us. And how do we bring on board the voices of the marginalized, the voices of the vulnerable in providing this crisis? For instance, when we talk about climate change solution, it's simply saying that, look, we are affected by this. Now, in providing a solution, make sure that the people who are affected by this have a say in the solution. So, for instance, we talk about climate change solution. There are people in the rural communities, who understands their settings better than those coming from anywhere as experts. So when you go, for instance, and you say that, can you do ABC? The people can tell you that, look, we have been living in this community over thousands of years, and we know how we associate with the ecosystems. So these are the solutions that are best to us. So this project across 8 countries in Africa is essentially saying that let's bring the voices of the marginalized, women, youth, disabled, the communities on board the climate change solution. As a youth focal person, my mandate is to galvanize the concerns of young people.
Are you doing that effectively?
The evidence are there for you to see. You can check up on my YouTube channel. You can check up on my Facebook. I've been in Kenya. I've been in Malawi. I've been in Senegal. I've been in Morocco, Mozambique. I've been in many countries.
What's the response from other African countries that you have visited?
It has been a mixed feeling. It has been a mixed feeling because when you expect that people would appreciate the extent to which climate change has affected them, the narrative has not been so. There are many people who cannot be able to associate climate change to what they are suffering. For instance, when there's drought, for instance, people think that it is the gods who are not happy with them. When there's tidal waves, when there's floods, there are people still across Africa country who think that it is their sins.
All sort of animals to appease the gods.
The god, and whilst it might appear a little bit funny, it is very sad. Because look, let me tell you, Lebanon, when you are able to clearly define the problem in a scientific process, that is where you're able to provide a solution. So when there's drought, you're unable to tell that it is as a result of the variability in the climate. This is how or why the rains are not coming down. You will not be able to provide the adaptation solution.
It boils down to education.
And that is why I must appreciate, yourself and your network for continually giving me this platform.
Right, Cedric, unfortunately, this is a broader conversation and hopefully we'll continue with it some other day. But let me take your final words.
It is always a pleasure to be here, and I thank you deeply for that. And I must confess that every one of us have a unique responsibility to address the climate crisis. And I'm challenging all government, individuals, corporations to embrace our shared responsibility in providing climate change solution. And that you matter. If climate change affects all of us, then all of us should be part of the equation of addressing the challenge. And I thank you deeply for this opportunity.
Right, thank you so much for passing through. I have been speaking to Cedric Dzelu. He is part of Africa Youth Focal. My name is Lebene Abrokwa. Up next is ENL with Bia Della. Stick and stay. We'll be right back.
ENL is next. Stay tuned.